So today we're going to work on the use of Excel in marketing research. So we've got some materials that we'll begin using for the rest of the semester. And they're under Resources, Advanced Automotive. And we have the Advanced Automotive Concepts data set for a survey that was taken for the Zen Motor Company. And there's 1,000 respondents, and they ask them 50 questions. And that's all encapsulated in this Excel workbook. In addition, we have some Excel lab exercises that show how to do the analysis, the types of analysis that we will be doing throughout the rest of the semester. And so we'll be downloading both those documents. So go ahead and do that. I'm going to just copy this version of Advanced Automotive Concepts workbook over to my desktop, and then double click it to open it. And I'll give you guys time to download the document as well, and also the Excel lab instructions that'll give you the step-by-step procedures you need to do in fundamental Excel to accomplish all the types of analysis we'll be doing. So let me switch my screen share over to Excel. I'll close my browser. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable editing. And next it tells me that I have macros, but they've been disabled. So I'm going to enable the macros. And this is going to enable the Excel Data Analyst add-in for Windows users only. You won't be able to use this on the Mac, but you will be able to use it on the Windows machines. And it makes the work a little bit easier, not all that much, but it's a little better and little less laborious than doing everything inside of Excel. On the other hand, Excel is a very powerful tool, and we can do everything we need to do inside of Excel. So before we actually begin our operations, let's just take a look at what we have in this survey data set. We have a worksheet entitled Data, and in the first row you have the names that refer to all of the questions. And then all of the rows underneath each column heading contain the values each respondent put into the answer for that question. If we go down, we see we have 1,000 rows, and we go to the right, we see we've got 50 columns. So quite a lot of data here. Another part we see is defined variables. This is the code book. Survey data sets will always have a code book that gives the description of each one of the variables, as well as things like the code values that a variable can take. So for example, we have a categorical variable, town size. The description of it, this is the size of the respondent's town or city. There's 5 codes that were assigned. 1 is for under 10,000, 2 is from 10,000 to 100, and so on. Likewise, we have a categorical variable, gender. The description of it is gender, the code values are 0 and 1. 0 for male, 1 for female. We also have, if we go over a little, a variable called reside. This is the number of people in the household. This is a metric variable, not a categorical variable, and it will have an integer number indicating the number of people in the household. So this is handy for you to use to figure out what variables you might want to do your analysis on. And of course, the data is available for us to use. So the first thing we're going to do is summarization. And that's where we get statistics from the sample itself. And there'll be two types of variables we'll use in our summarization. One is a categorical variable, and in that case, we'll get percents. We'll summarize percents. So let's start with that. First thing we want to do is create a new worksheet in our workbook. So we'll click this plus button, and that will create a new sheet for us, and it's called Sheet 1. Double click that, and it'll highlight Sheet 1, and type in age category. Now, the next step is we're going to copy a column of interest from data to our new sheet. So I'm going to go over to data. Let's copy age category. So I highlight column E and hit Control C. Then I go back to my age category worksheet. I put my cursor and click it over A1, cell A1. Then I hit Control V to paste it in. Next, I'm going to sort the variable. So I'll go up top to data, click on data. In the middle of the ribbon, I see something called sort. So I'll click on sort. And it says sort by age category, smallest to largest. So that's what I want. So I click on that. Next, I'm going to make a new column, and I'm just going to call this bins. And what I'm going to do is copy the data from column A. So I'm going to highlight A2, and I'm going to hit Control Shift down arrow. That highlights my data. I'm going to then Control left click, right click, and go copy. Then I'm going to paste that with a Control V into column B2. So now I've got age category and another column called bins. So with bins, what I want to do is undupe it. So I'm going to highlight B2, and then I'll hit again, Control Shift down arrow, highlight my B2 data. Then I'm still in the data tab under data menu on my ribbon. You'll notice I've got a segment called Data Tools, and there's one with this icon that is a blue, white, and blue bar, and that's for removing duplicates. So I'm going to click that one. It asks me if I want to expand the selection because it detects that I've got a column next to it. I do not want to do that. So I'm going to click instead continue with the current selection and then click remove duplicates. And OK. So I actually had 5 unique values in that 1,000. Now I'm going to do a value count. So let's say in column D2, I'm going to do a equals sign, and then I'm going to type in count if, and then parens. And then I can either manually type in A2 colon A1001, or I can come over here to Control Shift, put my comma, and then comma there, and then next I'm going to put in B2. And you'll notice that I now have a count of the number of respondents in column A who put 2 as their response. So I'm going to call this column frequency count. With that formula in place, all I have to do is move my mouse where I've got this big cross until it becomes a small cross. I move it towards this small square in the bottom right of that cell with the formula, and it becomes a small cross. I press down the left mouse and drag it down, and now I've applied the formula in succession to each one of the values. Next, I'm going to get a sum of all of them. So I place my cursor in D7, go to Home, and then over on the right, I see this sigma, and I'm going to use sum for that. Accept the default, and I have 1,000. So I just did a verification that it looks like my counts are good because they sum up to 1,000, which they should. The next thing I'm going to do is a frequency percent. So I'll make a new column up, frequency percent. That's going to be equal to, so I'm going to put in here equals D2 divided by 1,000, because that's the number in my survey. So I get 0.121. I drag that down, and I see in turn I get 0.174, 0.256, and so on. I'll highlight these values, frequency percents. So I'll click on E2, and here I'm just going to hold the left mouse down and drag it. So I highlight cells E2 through E6. I'm going to right click now and go down to Format Cells, and I'm going to select percentage. And now I've got my answers in a percentage format. Okay, so that's how we do it for Mac users. For Windows users, I'm going to come up to my add-ins. I'm going to go to the Excel Data Analyst add-in and click that. I'm going to click Summary, go to Percents. I'm going to select Age category. Then I'm going to do a 3D cylinder. And I get my percentages, and we see that they are the same as the percentages we got doing it manually. And let's go ahead and we get a nice graph. Let's go ahead and add a nice graph into our work here. So we'll highlight this frequency percent, come up to insert, and we'll insert a bar chart. I'm going to highlight the x-axis, right click, go select data, edit that. Then I'm going to highlight 2 through 6, B2 through B6. Now I've got my numbers associated, and I can even format the data series, add data labels. So I'll go ahead and add data labels, and I get the percentages up top, just like we had in our bar chart from Excel Data Analyst. So again, we can do everything on the Mac that we can do on Windows, and it's really not that difficult. Okay, so this is summarizing percents. We may also want to summarize quantitative variables. So that's a summarization based on averages. So let's go ahead and create another worksheet. So I get sheet 3. I'm going to double click that and change this to reside. Then I'm going to go over to my data worksheet and click it. And we see reside is column D. So I just highlight column D and do Control C. Come over to reside, place my cursor on cells A1, and click reside. Now that I've got them there, I can start doing some work with those, such as getting the average. So I'll type average. Here I'm going to, in the cell next to average, let's say D3, type in the equal sign. And then I'm going to say AVEA or AGE, average, paren, and then I can either put in A2 to A1001, or I can put my mouse and click on A2, hit Control Shift down arrow, hit the enter, and I get an average of 2.21. I can also get the standard deviation, and we'll use the .p option. So I do equals and then standard deviation .p. And again, I highlight A2, hit Control Shift down arrow, enter. And I get my standard deviation. I can get a max equals max. Again, click on A2, hit Control Shift down arrow, then hit enter. Scroll up and I have my max. So the maximum value was 9. The average was 2.21 with a standard deviation of 1.38. So let's go ahead and do the same thing with Excel Data Analyst. So I'll go over and click on add-ins, then Excel Data Analyst summarize averages. Reside is the number of people in household, so I'll select that. And it gives me my average of 2.2, standard deviation of 1.38 rounded up, and maximum of 9. So again, you see that we get the same value. doing it as we would on the Mac, as well as how we would do it on the Windows PCs. Once we've summarized our sample statistics, we next want to generalize those sample statistics to the overall population. So we'll start with doing a confidence interval for averages. So we're going to go through the same steps to get our summarization that we see here. And then once we have that, we're going to use the confidence level. So we're going to get our confidence amount. We'll type in equals confidence which is down here, and I'll double click that. Oops. Now, we're going to use 0.05 as our alpha. This is a common practice in marketing research to use 0.05 as your alpha. That's the error level you're willing to accept. Then I'm going to hit comma. Next, it wants standard deviation. So our standard deviation is in cell D4. So I'll type in D4. And you can see that it highlights that for us. Next, it wants the size of our sample, which is 1,000. So I'll type in 1,000 and paren and enter. And so we get this confidence amount of 0.08 and some change. Then I'm going to do an upper. We'll say upper equals our average, which was D3, minus the plus the confidence amount is D7, 2.29, and then the lower is going to be equal to our average, D3 equals D3 minus the confidence amount of D7, 2.12. Next, let's see how we do this for on the Windows machines. So we'll come over to our add-ins, go to Excel Data Analyst, down to Generalize. We're looking at confidence intervals here. So we'll select average. We're going to do number of people in the household. And we get, again, our standard deviation of 1.38 rounded up, the average of 2.2, lower boundary of 2.1, upper boundary of 2.3, which again is what we got when we did it for the way we will be doing it on Macs. Next, we'll want to do a generalization for using a confidence interval for percents. In other words, for categorical variables. So let's go back to our categorical variable age category, and we'll work with that one. Okay, so we're going to get our, here, we're going to use the formula in the book. And again, we're going to use a 0.05 alpha or a 95% confidence level. And we're going to use the formula in the book to get our confidence interval factor or standard deviation here. And the formula is equals to, so I type in equals 1.96 times the square root of P, the percentage. So we're going to do, in this case, the frequency count for bin 2 of 12.1%. So I'm going to go E2 times Q. And if you remember from the readings in the book, Q is 1 minus that. So we're going to say 1 minus E2 divided by the sample size of N, which in our case is 1,000. So I can pull this down and I can get the sample sizes for each one. So I'm going to put this standard deviation up there, highlight these guys and move them over here. I'm going to move this guy out of the way, the graph, and then I'll get an upper and lower. So the upper is going to be E2 plus F2. Hit enter. And the lower is going to be E2 minus F2. We got to do an equals sign in front of that. Okay, equals, there we go. And 10.8. And then I drag these down and get corresponding uppers and lowers for each one of the bin sizes. Okay, so that's generalizing with a confidence interval for percents. Let's see how we do that in our Windows machines. So we'll again come over to add-ins, Excel Data Analyst, generalize, confidence interval percent. I'm going to use age category. And let's just do those, that group there. So I click on those and I get the same corresponding values that we saw before. I get 10.1 to 14.1. So 10.1 to 14.1. For bin category 3, I'm going to get 15 to 19.75. So 15 to 19.7 and so on. So we get the same values again on the Windows machine that we got on the Mac machine. Okay, so very good so far. Next, we're going to do hypothesis testing, and we'll start with averages. So with averages, I'm going to go back to my reside worksheet because that's where we got an average for our quantitative variable, the number of people residing in a household. Now the formula for hypothesis testing, and I'll just type in hypothesis test, and we want to test if it's close to 2. So is the average close to 2? So we have our actual average of 2.21. So the formula is going to be the actual average, X bar, in this case, bar meaning that it's from our sample. And we have 2.21 for that, minus the hypothesized X value, and we hypothesize it's 2. Then we're going to divide that by the standard deviation, which in turn is divided by the square root of the count. So let's go ahead and put that in. So I'm going to type in equals sign, D3, which is our average. I'm going to put these in parens. So D3, paren D3, minus 2, which is the hypothesized value, divided by standard deviation, which is D4. So I'll put that in a paren, D4. And that in turn is divided by the square root of our count, which is 1,000. 1, 1, 2, 3. And close that off. And we get a value for our z-score of 4.81. Now, let's see how that compares with, this is for the Mac, this is how we do things on the Mac. Let's see how that compares with the number we get for this hypothesis test on Windows machines. So on Windows, I'll come up again up to add-ins, Excel Data Analyst, Generalized, Hypothesis Test, Average. I'm going to do it for number of people in household. The hypothesized average is 2. So I get a z-score of 4.81, the same. So the hypothesis is not supported because we have such a large sample. We can be pretty sure that it's going to be very close to 2.21, and that's quite a ways off from 2. So our z-score tells us that the 4.81, it's not supported. Okay, so we get, again, the same values doing it with the Mac as we do with our Windows machine. Next, we're going to do a hypothesis test on percentages. So that is going to be on our categorical variable. So I will go back to the worksheet, age cap, and we'll start on this for the Mac users. So again, we go through the whole process that we've gone through, and those are the steps in step 8, and we've already done them. So we'll skip down to part G, which is going to be our formula. And that formula is going to be equal to, so I'm going to say hypothesis test here of 13 for our bin 2, which is, of course, 12.1%. So the Z formula here is going to be equal to our percentage, and we're going to do it for bin 2, which we get 12.1%. So P is going to be our percentage, and Z is going to be equal to P minus the hypothesized P, which is 13, divided by the square root of P times 1 minus P divided by count. So let's go ahead and put that in. So I'm going to say equal sign, and I'll put this in parens, it's going to be E2 minus 0.13 divided by the square root of, square root of P times 1 minus P, that's Q, divided by the count, which is 1,000. Oh, I missed a paren somewhere. So, P is going to be equal to E2, and then E2 up there as well. And so we get a value of minus 0.87 for our z-score on this one. So let's take a look at how we do this on a Windows machine. Okay, so we'll go over again to add-ins, generalize, hypothesis test, percentage. I'm going to do age category. In this case, I'm going to do 18 to 24, and my hypothesized percent is 13. And you'll note that we get a minus 0.87 here. In this case, because it is a percent rather than an average, it is supported. So that it is supported that the generalized population could have a 13% frequency of 18 to 24-year-olds. So that's our generalize the hypothesis for percents. Again, we get the same values as we have all along, doing it with the Excel functions versus doing it with the Excel data analyst tool. Now let's look at comparing two different groups. So I'm going to make a new worksheet up, and over here we see sheet 10. I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to call this 2 group. And in data, we're going to get 2 columns of interest. So we'll start with that 2 group percent. We're going to get 2 columns of interest from our data. We'll get gender and cycle preference. So I'll go over to data. First column I will get is gender, which is column B. So I'll highlight column B and hit Control C. Then I'll go back to my 2 group worksheet, place my cursor in cell A1 and hit Control V. Now I've got my gender in there. I'm going to save the worksheet. Next, I'll go back to data. And now I'm going to select cycle preference. So we'll, went too far. Okay, so here I have cycle preference. So I'm going to select column AJ, Control C, go back to 2 group, put my cursor in cell B1, hit Control V. Now I've got cycle preference as well. So I'm going to next do a pivot table with gender as the column and cycle preference as the row. So let's start with that. So in my 2 column, I'll hit save. I put my cursor somewhere in these 2 columns. I go up to insert, tables, pivot table. I'm going to accept the default for the table range. I'm going to put my pivot table in the existing worksheet. And here we see my pivot table. And what we're going to do is just highlight gender and drag it over to columns, and cycle preference and drag it down to where it says rows. Then I'm going to take cycle preference, drag it down to values, and you'll notice it says sum of cycle preference. I'm going to click this down arrow. I'm going to go down to value field settings, and I'm going to select count. So now I have a count in there, and that is interesting, but I think it'd be even better if I did some more work on this. So I'm going to now click this, the down arrow next to count of cycle preference. Again, from my pop-up menu, go to value field settings. I'm going to click on show values as, and here you'll see I've got a drop-down list box. No calculation. I'm going to go down to percentage of column total. Select that one. Click OK. And now I have a percentage of column total for each one of my values for cycle preference. The one I'm primarily interested in is very desirable, this last one, which is value 7. Okay, next let's see how we do this for Windows. That's how we do it with the Mac. Now let's go over to add-ins, data analyst. I'm going to come down to to group. I'm going to do percents. And we had a gender as the grouping variable and preference for Supercycle 1 hybrid as the target. And I select 1 in this case. So it's something interesting is with the Windows, you can only select them 1 at a time. So actually it's easier on the Mac in this particular case. Okay, so I've selected very desirable and I click OK. It does its processing and I find 6.5% and 6.3%. And if I go back to the age cat here, no, that's going to be the 2 group percent is what we were on. Oh, there it is, 2 group percent. I got 6.5 and 6.2 round, rounding. So 6.3, 6.26 rounds up to 3, and 6.53 rounds down to 6.5. Okay, so we got that. So we find that there is a difference between men and women and their preference for Supercycle 1. And this is something that is supported. Okay, again, we get the same results though with the Windows approach and the Mac way of doing things. All right, next, let's compare 3 groups or more. So I'm going to come over back to my 2 group table here. And I'm going to change the values to average for Supercycle down here. So I click the down arrow next to count of cycle pref, go over, I'm going to change this to no calculation, summarize values by average, and I get in my grand total 3.5 basically and 3.1. So let's try this with Windows. So I'll go to compare, 3 group averages, and I'll take gender, add that as my grouping variable, and then preference as my target variable, click OK, and it's doing its processing. Okay, and I've been doing a lot of work on this worksheet, so there, okay. Obviously, the Excel data analyst tool takes a lot more processing power than just doing it in Excel with Excel functions. So one of the things you have to watch out for is if you keep doing a lot and a lot and a lot of work, sometimes you'll run into memory faults and you'll have to restart. Looked like we were getting close there, but again, we've been doing an awful lot of work. This is like the type of thing we'll be doing through the complete rest of the semester, but obviously in each class we'll be doing only one of the things. So we're doing a lot of work here, but again, on the Mac, we wouldn't have that problem at all because we're just sticking with the Excel functions themselves. But notice that again, we get the same values. For women, we get 3.1. For men, we get 3.5. Let's go back to our 2 group. For men, column label 0 is men, 3.5 rounds up to 3.5. Women are 1, 3.1 rounds up to 3.1. So again, we get the same values doing it both ways. Advantage to Mac is that it's not as processor or memory intensive. So that's a good thing too. Okay, next, let's look at doing cross tabulation where we relate things. So we'll be doing 2 types of relation comparisons, cross tabs and then correlation. So let's start with cross tabs. I'm going to make another sheet up and I'm going to call this one X tabs for cross tabs. And I'm going to put into it 2 variables of interest. So I come back to data and let's take gender again. So that's a good one. Age category is another good one. So I'll do Control C and then arrow back to my X tabs worksheet, place my cursor in cell A1, hit Control V to paste things in. I'm going to save my worksheet. And then we'll go back to data. And this time, let's pick up something different. Let's pick up the favorite magazine type. So we'll pick up magazines. And come back to X tabs, place my cursor in V1, and I paste in with Control V, magazines. Now, let's just make sure that the magazines variable, in fact, is our favorite magazines. So I'll click on Define Variables in our code book, and we'll scroll over magazine. It is favorite magazine type. Okay, so that's good. Let's arrow back to our X-tabs worksheet. And we'll save this. We now have our categories of interest. Next, I'm going to make a counting column. So I'm going to call this 1 count. I'm just going to fill the column with ones. So I'm going to put a 1 in here. Then I'm going to move my cursor to the bottom right corner of that cell where you see that little square. My cursor becomes smaller. Now I can drag this down and it'll copy ones everywhere. So I'm going to drag this down to the end of the list. Of course, there's 1,000 elements in this particular list. So I'll copy down to 1,001 because I'm starting on column 2, and there we are. So I have ones everywhere, and that way I can count each one of those in turn. So next, I'm going to select my column. So I'll put my cursor in here. Okay, once I've selected anywhere in this list of these 3 columns, I go up to Insert up top. Over to the left, I have tables. I'll click down arrow on the tables. And pivot tables is one of the tables I can select. So I'll click on Pivot Table. I'll accept the suggested range. I don't want it in a new worksheet. I want it in this one. So I'll click on Existing Worksheet. I'll click on the location text box and I'll just put it in column F2. Click OK. Okay, so now I've got the framework for creating my pivot table. I'm going to move gender to columns. I'm going to use magazines to rows. I'm going to move 1 count to the values. And now I have some numbers that I can use to show the correlation of gender and magazine type. So let's see what happens when we do this same exercise on a Windows machine. So I'll go up to Add-ins. I'm going to then go over to Excel Data Analyst, come down to Relate, do crosstabs. So gender was my column variable, and then favorite magazine type was my row variable. So that's this one. Click OK, and it does its processing. And again, we see the same numbers. So for example, the last one, in this case, news and politics, 3641. So I come over to my X tabs that we did for the Mac, 3641. Up top, second one for row label 2, 114, 167. I come over to crosstabs, column 2, music and entertainment, 114, 167. Okay, so again, we get the same values for both the Mac and the Windows approach. Now we're going to be going over each one of these topics: crosstabs, groupings, hypothesis testing, confidence intervals, and so on, as we progress through the course. I just wanted to give you a worksheet which is the lab directions. And that's what I've been following as we've been doing all this, is the lab directions. So these are lab directions that show you how on the Mac to actually do this. On the Windows machine, it's really a matter of just selecting the right drop-down menus. Okay, let's save our worksheet. We still have one more thing to do, and that is the correlation. So I'm going to come up with a correlation worksheet. And let's put 2 columns of interest for that. Let's go back to our data and we'll take cycle preference. There's our data tab. So I'm going to move it to the right. Cycle pref, column AJ. I highlight column AJ and hit Control C. I then arrow back to my correlation worksheet right there, click on it. Put my cursor in cell A1. And there we go. Next, let's put in lifestyle. And we'll choose lifestyle 1. We've talked about lifestyle in the class, so let's take a look. We actually have lifestyle 1 here, so we'll say column AO, lifestyle 1. I'll hit Control C. Come over to correlation. Put in lifestyle. We'll save this one. Next, I want to find out how correlated they are. So I'll just type in correlation as a header. And here I'm going to type in next to it in cell E4, equal sign CORREL. You'll note it brings up the function, which is our correlation. I put in parens. The first array I want to put in is the cycle preference. So I click cell A2, hit Control Shift down arrow, hit comma. Now I'm on array 2. I bring this back up. I click on cell B2, and then I hit Control Shift down arrow. I've got my 2 arrays. I hit enter. And I get a correlation of 0.78. Again, this is how we do it on the Mac. Let's see how we do it with Excel Data Analyst on Windows. So I'm going to come over to Excel Data Analyst, going to do relate, correlate. My primary variable is going to be cycle preference. There we go, preference for super cycle 1C. My secondary is going to be lifestyle 1, which is novelist. So I'll add that as my other variable. And I click OK. And my correlation is 0.79. Coming back to my correlation sheet here, I can see that 0.788252 would round up to 0.79. So again, as with all the other types of statistical analysis, we get the same numbers doing it on the Mac with the Mac method of doing things and doing it on Windows with the Windows method of doing things. Okay, thank you.